Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to be with you this afternoon as we open up the Bible again, part of our winter devotion series. We're moving now into the New Testament, and we're looking at a passage from the book of Romans. Have you ever gone on a long run? Maybe you decided you're going to do 5Ks, one of those park runs, and all you're really waiting for is the end, aren't you, at the start? But as the effort and energy is expended at the start and you get towards the end of it, there's a real sense of satisfaction when you finish. You really can rejoice in what's happening, can't you? You can rejoice in the completed product. The book of Romans is a bit like a marathon. It's hard work, particularly at the start. There's lots of heavy doctrine. And as we get to the end of the book, we're meant to find some kind of satisfaction, some kind of resolution to all the heavy, hard doctrine, all the reflection on what Jesus has done and who God is and the nature of the world. And Paul resolves his book in this little portion from Romans chapter 15, verse 7 with these words. He says, "Accept one another just as Christ has accepted you in order to bring praise to God." That's an interesting resolution, isn't it? We expect our resolution to be something that eases or lifts the burden off us. But when we reflect on those words, it's quite a challenge to accept one another, just as Christ has accepted us in order to bring praise to God. That's a very challenging verse. And we might feel like we've run the marathon of Romans only to hit a hurdle right at the end and find the ultimate challenge of the book in these last chapters. Well, in a sense, the preparation is all part of the story of Romans, see. We find it hard to serve people, don't we? And I don't know about you, but I think that we're all running on empty at the moment with the pandemic. And so serving someone, opening up our lives to people, thinking of others more highly than ourselves, these are all really challenging things to do right now. It feels like energy which we just don't have to expend. And what's really interesting is that we might be tempted to give ourselves a leave pass at the moment, to believe that actually this is not the time for service. But it's really important to remember that whenever the Bible calls people to service, it's written by people who are themselves enduring great hardship. The book of Romans was written by Paul, who himself is experiencing great hardship. He's writing to Christians who are in the midst of a great season of hardship. And so he doesn't ask them to accept one another because everything in their life is really easy. The call to service is always a call to those who are enduring difficulty and challenge. So where do we find the resources for that? Well, Paul, he kind of answered it in verse 7, but he goes on in verses 8 and 9 to give us further reinforcement, further encouragement. He says, "For I tell you that Christ has become a servant of the Jews on behalf of God's truth, so that the promises made to the patriarchs might be confirmed, and moreover that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy." That's an extraordinary line right at the start there. "For I tell you that Christ has become a servant of the Jews." He's become a servant of those who did not want to serve him, of the nation whose history had been to turn its back on God. Remember, Isaiah was the story of the failed nation of Israel, the failed servant. But Christ has chosen to serve the failed servant. What good news. I don't know if you've ever been to a dinner party and someone more important than you is sitting around the lounge room where you're all having pre-dinner nibbles, and they decide to get up and pick up the plate and serve each of the other people in the room. Have you ever had that experience where someone, the more important guest, does it? I always feel self-conscious in that moment. It should have been me. I should have picked up the plate. Jesus is the most important person in the room, and yet his most important act is to serve us, Remember what Paul said in verse 7? "Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you." It's just a reminder again, as I hope this whole series has been so far, that the act of service is always in response to God's great servant-hearted act in the Lord Jesus for us. Christ came and served those who did not want to serve him. And the more we realize that, the more we are confronted by that, comforted by that, energized by that, the more we will want to jump up and serve others. Who can you serve this week? In the midst of this pandemic, who can you open your heart and your life to?